Welcome back to another edition of the BrownsZone.com Zone Coverage Podcast. My name is Andy Barch with AM 930 WEOL and 100.3 FM, and I am joined again by Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter with the Chronicle, Telegram, the Medina Gazette, and of course, BrownsZone.com. Scott, great to see you again, and certainly looking forward to today's episode where we are going to hit on a number of different things. The Joe Schobert situation. You wrote a nice article on BrownsZone.com detailing your thoughts on that. A director of high performance, and I know Jim Ingram kind of hit on that a little bit. And, of course, we'll get your major takeaways from the Combine. You spent quite a bit of time in Indy, so we'll have some fun with all of that over the next 20, 25 minutes here. Let's begin, though, Scott, with Joe Schobert, because this has really become a fascinating situation. You know, the Browns, and you were right there in the middle of it, seem to think that they might be better off by not going with Joe Schobert. He's going to become a free agent, and it seems like there are going to be a lot of interested parties in Joe Schobert if indeed he does not come back to the Browns.
Yeah, you know, he's their really signature free agent, right? And Demarius Randall's going to be a free agent, Rashard Higgins, Greg Robinson, but they're not going to bring back Robinson. They're not going to bring back Randall. If Higgins comes back, it'll be on a cheap deal, a prove-it deal, just because he had such a bad year last year. So Joe Schobert's the main guy. And to me, he does everything the way you want him to do it. Works hard, dedicated, smart, has gotten better throughout his career, wants to stay in Cleveland. It seems like a no-brainer to me to want to keep that guy, especially with the roster that's got a lot of holes on it, right? We know they need safeties, they need tackles, they need tight ends, they need a pass rusher. And we can go down the list. Why create another hole right in the middle of your defense? And that sounds like what the Browns are willing to do because, you know, and I talked to a league source, the Browns are not willing to pay what Joe Schobert's probably going to get on the open market. And it just doesn't make sense to me. I think Joe has done everything you want him to do during his 4 years with the Browns. I wrote in that column that he's a borderline Pro Bowler, and I really feel that way. He went to the Pro Bowl after 2017, and I thought that was a bit of a fluke. The Pro Bowl voting it's not perfect. In that year, I thought, man, there's no way Joe Schobert's a Pro Bowler. And then I thought in 2018, when he was healthy, because he missed some time with some hamstring injury, he played much better. And then I thought he played even better this year. So to me, he's legitimately a borderline Pro Bowl guy. And if you have that kind of guy on your roster, keep him. And good teams don't let their good players walk away. And the Browns have plenty of salary cap room. You know, I think overthecap.com has them at $62 million. That will probably grow if they cut Vernon or if they cut Hubbard or if they cut Kirksey. And what we're really quibbling about here is, are you willing to pay him $8 million as opposed to $12 million a year? And to me, that's not worth it. When you have that kind of salary cap space, when you have the Browns' history of being bad, when you have the roster that you have with its holes, spend the extra $4 million a year. To me, it doesn't make sense to pinch pennies in that situation. And then you wind up spinning your wheels because then you have to go fill that spot. Unless you think Sione Takitaki, the third-round pick a year ago, can step right in. But first of all, Andrew Berry did not draft him. Kevin Stefanski was not the coach when they scouted Takitaki. And he didn't do anything as a rookie to say, yes, he's going to step in a middle linebacker. So the scenario I see happening is you let Schobert walk, and then you have to go draft a middle linebacker anyway. And let's say you draft a guy at number 42. And Kenneth Murray, guy from Oklahoma who I talked to at the Combine, has got a great story, by the way. But let's say they happen to draft him. He falls. He's there at 42. You draft Kenneth Murray at 42. Well, maybe he's an upgrade to Joe Schobert at some point. And maybe it's a wash and you're saving a bunch of money. But you also could have drafted a pass rusher at 42 or a tight end or a safety. So it just feels like you're spinning your wheels. And to me, the bottom line is the Browns don't have enough good players to let, to me, a legitimately good one walk away.
You look at that position and you examine it even further. You know, there has to be a reason why they feel comfortable enough letting him at least test the free agent waters. So what is it? Is it a financial thing, or do they feel confident enough in the group that they currently have? I mean, there's got to be some sort of underlying belief that they think that at least what they have in the room currently is good enough, or maybe they think that there's a talent that could be attainable either at 10 or at 42, as you mentioned. Yeah. So there's got to be some combination of that going on.
Well, you would hope so, and I'm glad you brought that up. And if that's the case, then fine. And if they have a plan, okay. But if it's simply linebackers aren't as important as they used to be, and we can argue that because you can say they're not because you only play two and you're in a nickel so much. But the fact is, the linebackers are asked to cover the tight ends and cover the running backs. And we talked to Clemson's Isaiah Simmons at the Combine, and he talked about how he is so valuable because somebody's got to cover Travis Kelce, and somebody has to cover George Kittle. So while linebacker isn't as important, like if you said, okay, let's rank it. It's pass rusher, it's cornerback, maybe it's interior defensive lineman, and then you get to linebacker and safety. Well, that's fine. And you can have a grand structure that says we're not going to pay linebackers $10 million. And I would get that from a philosophical standpoint. I don't agree with it in this specific case. And the other part of that is I think it just comes down, you say, well, they have a plan. Maybe it's as simple as we don't think Joe Schobert's a $10 million a year player. And while I understand that thinking, and I might even agree with that, it feels to me like you can say that in a vacuum. But the reality is he's on your team, and he's a good player, and make an exception for that, right? It just feels like you have these hard and fast rules, and sometimes I think you need to break them. And the fact is, I have a hard time. They're going to pay Myles Garrett whatever they're going to wind up paying Myles Garrett, right? I mean, that's my expectation. So if it's $24 million a year, let's say, is Myles Garrett worth $24 million? Like, I think you can have this argument with any guy at any position. Is he worth it? Is Dak Prescott worth the $35 million the Cowboys are going to pay him? Probably not, but I think it's the right move because who's going to play quarterback for you, right? And if we're fighting between $8 million and $12 million, to me that just isn't a big enough gap, especially when contracts today, you're probably committing to Joe Schobert for 2 years. And I think if you're Kevin Stefanski and you're trying to instill your philosophy and you want good guys who do the right things, who show up and work hard every day, I think Joe Schobert's a good guy to have around for the next 2 years. Even if it costs you, let's say at the most, an extra $8 million that you have to spend and you have under their salary cap.
One last question on this topic before we move on to a different one. In your mind, having spoken to the Browns and having spoken to the agent, all the necessary pieces and parts surrounding this situation, does your gut tell you he's coming back here, or does your gut tell you he's going to be taken up by somebody in free agency?
No, it's not only my gut. My gut and people I talk to tell me he's going to be elsewhere. Now it's not a done deal, right? There's a chance that he could come back. I've been told that the door is open. But I think what would have to happen is Joe would have to get to the market, which is going to happen. You can start negotiating March 16th with other teams. March 18th is the day you can start signing. And Joe's going to get to the market, and there's going to be multiple teams willing to pay Joe what he wants or close to what he wants, and that's going to be more than the Browns are willing to spend. Now, maybe Joe gets an offer, and the agent goes to the Browns, and the Browns have a change of heart, and they say, okay, this is concrete now. We know the number. Let's match it and see if Joe stays. I can envision that scenario, but I believe that Andrew Berry has kind of set a number, and the number that Joe Schobert's going to get on the open market is going to be too high for Berry to change his mind. So I think Joe's gone.
All right, well, that'll be interesting to follow here. The next couple of weeks, you mentioned that date, March 16th, is when you can start taking a closer look at some of this. That's 2 weeks from today, so that's coming at us pretty quickly. Now, you were at the Combine. You were down in Indy, and you saw a lot of different guys roll through. Who were some of the guys that really kind of caught your eye, and what were some of your major takeaways from that experience? We
have to start with the tackle position, right? Because that was my main focus going in to the Combine. And, in so many years it's quarterback, right? And as a Browns media, we're focused on the quarterbacks, or it's the Myles Garrett year, and it's pass rusher. The guys that are going to go one or two, right? Because that's when the Browns have drafted so often. And this year, it felt like it had to be tackle because we know the Browns have needs at both spots. Greg Robinson's not coming back, like you mentioned, and he wasn't going to come back before he was found with 157 pounds of weed. And now he's certainly not going to come back. Chris Hubbard, my guess is he gets cut. One of the nicest guys in the Browns locker room. Struggled, I thought, more so in 2019 than 2018. You need to upgrade that. So I think they'll cut him and save $6 million. Now, maybe he comes back and he's your insurance policy. He's your third tackle. Because $6 million is not a crazy number to pay a guy. But they're looking to upgrade at both spots. So with that in mind, I stood there and talked to the top tackle prospects. And it started with Mekhi Becton from Louisville, who, you look at all these guys. And I've been going to the Combine for it's probably 15 years now. And there's a couple guys a year that just physically you look at and you go, oh my gosh. And he's one of those guys. I mean, I think he's 6'7". He weighed in at 364. And now the way the Combine works is whatever day that was. I want to say that was Tuesday. So it's Tuesday morning. We're at the Combine like 8 a.m. and they start bringing the tackles. So it's for the next 2 hours, it's a whole string of tackles line up at about 8 at a time. So you're right there evaluating them kind of in real time, right? So it's not like the next day you go, oh, man, what did he look like? I see Becton, and then half an hour later I see Andrew Thomas, and half an hour later I see Josh Jones or whoever it is, and you get a real comparison. And Becton just was in a whole different galaxy physically than these other guys. And we're talking the biggest humans on the planet, and he stood out. I mean, he's just wider and taller. He's just a bigger human being than the rest of these guys. And then he goes and runs like a 5.1 40, which is an unbelievable time for a guy that big. The scouts love his athleticism. He ran the wide zone scheme at Louisville, which is what Kevin Stefanski is going to run in Cleveland. Now, he's not perfect, and it's interesting, right? You follow all these mock drafts, and you read all these analyses. And like Daniel Jeremiah, super respected, the lead draft analyst on NFL Network, says he's the best tackle in the draft, and the Giants should take him at number 4. And then you look at Pro Football Focus, and they have him ranked 5th at offensive tackle, which means he could be there 25 or 32, wherever. So it's interesting how that varies. So obviously his film's not perfect, but he's got all the skill in the world. And you see him, and I like talking to him, and you go, okay, you can envision this guy being a dominating tackle for 12 or 14 years. And then you talk to Andrew Thomas from Georgia, and he's big, but not as big, right? More narrow than Becton. Becton's just a house. Like I can't even convey the difference looking at these guys. Andrew Thomas is a possibility. He started his career at right tackle, switched to left tackle. Some people think he's the best tackle prospect. And then you have Josh Jones from Houston, and Austin Jackson from USC, and Tristan Wirfs from Iowa, and Jedrick Wills from Alabama. And these are all guys I think Browns fans need to familiarize themselves with, because the Browns are going to take one or two of these guys. I really feel that way. Maybe it's at number 10. Maybe they feel they like an Austin Jackson, I think he's 20 years old. He's got a big upside. He donated bone marrow to, I think it's his sister. So he wasn't able to work out like last offseason like he would hope to. So you feel like he's got a whole bunch of potential. So maybe they figure they can trade down and get a guy like that at 17 or 21. And I just don't think those are things you have to watch as a Browns fan. But you talk to all these guys, and it reaffirmed to me, number one, that it's a good class to be looking for your left tackle. There's a lot of options and a lot of variety for exactly what you're looking for. And number two, it kind of reminded me how I like to talk to offensive linemen, right? Traditionally, they're the easiest guys to talk to in the locker room because you have to be smart to play the position. You have to work as a unit, so there's some sense of selflessness, maybe you don't have as a receiver or corner. They're just usually the best guys to talk to. Not all the time. Greg Robinson was difficult this year. He's good when you talk to him, but he'd be difficult. But in general, in talking to all these guys at the Combine, I really enjoyed it, and I thought the Browns could go a bunch of different ways and still be successful. Now, obviously, there's going to be a best tackle from this class, and it's their job to identify him. But I think we can get to April 23rd, I think is the first round of the draft. And if the Browns took one of 4 or 5 guys, I think the fan base could have reason to get behind those guys and be excited about them.
You mentioned they might pick more than just one of the guys that you mentioned, too, because it seems like on both ends of the line, there's certainly a lot of questions. So what are the chances that they could take maybe tackles with their first 2 picks, or maybe they end up picking tackles with, say, 2 of their first 3 or 2 of their first 4?
Well, I think it's possible. I think the more likely scenario is they sign, let's say, a right tackle in free agency, because there's some options there. Jack Conklin's the guy that jumps to the top of the group. He feels like he's the best option out there. He's only been in the league 4 years. You sign him, from from Tennessee. He played the last 4 years with Tennessee. They didn't pick up that 5th-year option before his 4th year because he'd been hurt, and then he has a really good year, so now he's probably going to hit free agency. If you sign a guy like that, and then you draft Becton or Thomas or Wills or Wirfs at number 10, you solve both problems, right? You solve left tackle and right tackle. And then I could see a scenario where you draft another guy later, right? You add a 3rd tackle. You say, okay, we've solved our tackle problem in one offseason, and I think that'd be a huge thing for this front office to accomplish. I think there's also a scenario where you don't pay the money for Conklin or Bulaga or whoever that right tackle you have in mind. Somebody else pays more, and then you go into the draft saying, we need 2 guys. And then I don't think it'd be outlandish at all to say 10 and 42 get spent on tackles, or maybe more likely, you trade down from 10 so you get the extra picks so you can try to fill more of those holes. And then you take a guy like Houston's Josh Jones and I'm just throwing these numbers out, but you take him at 22, and then at 42, you take Austin Jackson if he's still there, or whoever that, there's a guy, his last name is a tough one to pronounce, but he's Prince from Auburn, and it turns out his grandfather was a king in Nigeria, but he's really kind of like a mayor, but he's kind of going to be in that vicinity in that second round. And I can see a scenario where the Browns go young with both those guys, and then maybe that's when they decide they don't cut Chris Hubbard and they bring him back in case, right? You have a buffer to get you through the first year, but then you have your 2 cornerstone tackles. So I think it's certainly a scenario that they could take multiple tackles, and I'd be stunned if they don't, through free agency and the draft, add 2 or 3 tackles.
Getting outside of the tackle position for just a moment here, there seems to be a lot of uncertainty on the other end of the ball, right? I mean, on defense, nobody really knows what's going to happen with Schobert. The outlook doesn't look very good right now. Right. Same with Olivier Vernon, right? I mean, it seems like he may be a casualty as well. And the Browns made some cuts a couple weeks ago as well, too. So was there anybody in particular on that side of the ball that really kind of stood out to you at the Combine that could potentially be a target for the Browns?
Well, the interesting thing is Isaiah Simmons from Clemson is the guy that kind of registered with me because the Browns aren't going to get Chase Young, right? He's going to go number 2 or number 3, the Ohio State DN. They probably don't take a D tackle that high in the top 10 because they have Ogunjobi, because they have Richardson. Now, there's a whole lot in play here, especially because you have a change at GM. What if Barry doesn't like Richardson? Does he cut him in a surprise move, and then all of a sudden you have a hole at defensive tackle, and then everything's on the table. And I can certainly envision that, and the same thing applies to Olivier Vernon. He's scheduled to make $15 million in 2020. He's coming off a season where he had 3.5 sacks. I think he missed 6 games with the knee injury at the end of the season. It would make sense to cut him and save that money. But all of a sudden, you don't have a second end, right? You have Myles Garrett, and then you have a giant hole on the other end. And they supposedly had filled that with Vernon, right? The trade for Vernon said, okay, they got 2 bookend ends. So if you get rid of Vernon, and even if you don't, you need to upgrade that position. But if you get rid of him, the need's immediate. And then you could take the best pass rusher at number 10. Like all of a sudden you can have a legitimate conversation. Is left tackle or end more important? So there's a lot on the table here. But Isaiah Simmons from Clemson is incredibly intriguing. He's a linebacker. He's not a middle linebacker, so I don't think he slides in for Schobert in the true sense. But he's a run-and-chase guy. He's a cover linebacker. He's got a lot of safety in him, cover skills. He can blitz off the edge. He's a hybrid kind of guy, which is more valuable in today's NFL. I don't think he's there at 10, but if you have a run on quarterbacks and a run on tackles, maybe he is there at 10. and you just say, we're taking the best player available, and he would probably be that guy at number 10, and then you figure out where to play him and how to use him. So he's intriguing. I just feel like with the Browns' need at tackle and needs elsewhere, they probably don't take Isaiah Simmons. But let's say their draft board has him as the second best player in the draft behind Chase Young. Do you ignore him at number 10 when you feel like the team's not a finished product and you're not going to win the Super Bowl in 2020? And he's now everybody uses the word now, but he's a generational type player. I can envision Andrew Berry talking himself into Isaiah Simmons. So he was a top defensive guy I paid attention to. But, there's pass rushers in this draft. There's safeties. Antoine Winfield Jr. is a guy that could be in the second round. The Browns need safeties, right? They probably need two. They're going to let Randall go. Morgan Burnett's 30-something, and he's coming off of torn Achilles. Eric Murray and Justin Burris are both unrestricted free agents. Now, maybe they sign them for depth, but neither one of those guys you say, okay, he's my every snap starter, right? Every snap player at safety. So they do. They have holes all over, and not to go back to that Joe Schobert thing, but there's a chance they create more of those holes by letting Schobert leave, by cutting Olivier Vernon. And all of a sudden you have pressing needs at every level of that defense. And I think when we would talk last year before training camp, we wouldn't have said that. We would have thought, man, they're solid. We thought they had 5 or 6 linemen. We liked their linebackers because they had 2 new ones in addition to Schobert and Kirksey. And they could cut Kirksey, right, because he's going to make a bunch of money. We thought Randall would come back and they'd figure out a way to re-sign him. All of a sudden, there's a lot of uncertainty. And really, you have Myles Garrett, Larry Ogunjobi, and your 2 corners. And those are really the only 4, I would say, sure things on your defense. And that's a little bit scary.
We'll dive into more of these draft prospects in future episodes for sure, because the draft, believe it or not, is about 7 weeks away. It's creeping up on us for sure. But we'll close with this. We alluded to this in the first couple minutes of the show today. Jim Ingram had written an article on this, kind of asking a bunch of questions along the way about what a director of high performance does exactly. So any idea what the role of the director of high performance will be with the Browns?
Yeah, it's supposed to be the role of managing, improving player wellness, right? And that's a pretty nebulous term. But it includes sports science. It includes strength and conditioning. It includes nutrition. So I think it's just a guy or person that oversees all of those different areas within the team, right? The Browns already have strength and conditioning people. They have nutrition people. They have sports science people. It's all under this person's umbrella. And it's an interesting concept. The easy joke is, and I'm sure Jim made it, and I think I made it the day before, is the Browns haven't had high performance, so maybe they were missing the director of high performance, right? Like, that's the difference, is they found this guy. I think it's interesting that he spent 7 years with the Eagles, and then there was a parting of the ways in the offseason. Obviously, Andrew Berry knows him. He was with the Eagles last year. Brings him in. He used to work with Navy SEALs, so there's something interesting about that, and impressive about that. So, I'm not the kind of guy that's just going to snicker about it. I do think in today's NFL, you get some fancy titles, right? And you wonder if this guy will be able to live up to that title, because it's a little convoluted title. But, if they figure out a way to have fewer hamstring injuries, right, that's a good thing. If you figure out a way to have less cramping, all these things that translate to the field. That's the important part, is how can he help these guys be at peak performance when it comes to Sunday at 1 o'clock? And, obviously he's smarter and he's way more experienced than I would be. And you would think that that kind of experience and education hopefully would transfer to results, right? And that's the key, and that's all of it, right, is when you have your medical staff and your athletic training staff, is how do we limit this? How do we improve that? And, I think it's hard to necessarily judge that, right? Do we line up hamstring injuries? You know what I mean? It's a difficult thing to pin down, but I'm all for giving it a try.
Well, I guess at this point it certainly can't hurt, can it? I mean, I think that's the major takeaway from that. It can't really hurt at this point. All right, Scott. Well, we're getting to that point in the year now where we can bring back the golf shot of the week. Maybe not just quite yet because the snow that came down at the end of last week just melted this morning, but we're getting awfully close to coming back to that.
I know. I'm so glad you said that because that gives me a reason to smile. As I look out the studio, the sun's peeking through a little bit. I could envision myself at the driving range within the next 2 days. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to talking about golf shot of the week. I'll give a shout-out to Northwestern guy Luke Donald. Faded a little bit on Sunday, but was on the leaderboard at the Honda Classic. And it's a big thing for Luke because he'd fallen off big time. He had a back injury. He used to be number one in the world. Now he's in the 400s, I think. So it's nice to see him back in contention. And maybe next time we do this, and we won't be able to talk about an actual golf shot because I won't have played golf in the next week, but I feel positive I'll be at the range before the next time we do one of these.
Nice. Well, we can talk about your best shot at the range.
There you go.
Yeah, not too shabby. Scott, a pleasure as always, and look forward to doing this again soon.
Perfect. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you, Scott. Again, that's Scott Petrak, Browns beat reporter with the Chronicle, Telegram, Medina Gazette, and, of course, BrownsZone.com. For Scott Petrak, this is Andy Barch saying thank you again for tuning in to today's edition of the BrownsZone.com Zone Coverage Podcast.